and welcome to the Advertising Hour with me, Scott Colnut. Today I've got a very special guest in Adam Mendler, CEO of the Veloz Group and podcast host of 30-Minute Mentors. Welcome and thanks so much for your time, Adam.
Scott, thanks for having me. Excited to be here with you and with your listeners.
Excellent, thank you. So, I was looking at your background, which we're going to go into in a little bit of detail, and thinking about you as a guest, it's hard to know where to start with research and topics. And this is just going to be a fascinating area just with you as a writer and an interviewer and a CEO. There's so many different tangents. And I know you speak regularly on your podcast, which we're going to talk about throughout, the 30-Minute Mentors, leaders to listen to is, I think, the tagline that you use. And you talk regularly and speak regularly on the topics of lessons learn from American leaders and America's top leaders. And so I was thinking to myself, well, that is interesting, but I can listen to your podcast, I can listen to you speak. So do I want to ask you the questions specifically about those lessons? And though that would be interesting, I actually realized the situation that I'm in. I'm very early on in kind of my podcast journey with this podcast. I host another podcast, which is already fairly popular, that I've recently taken over hosting duties on. And so I'm finding my feet with interviewing guests. And so then it kind of came together and I thought, well, let's look at interviewing lessons in respect to America's top leaders, because it's a fascinating skill of yours to be able to, again, if our listeners go and listen to your podcast, the way in which you both extract and then condense succinct information from leaders. It takes a lot of skill to ask the right questions, but then also to set up the environment to ask those questions in. So that's kind of sets up why I went with this topic today, and I just thought that would be fascinating to jump into, that unique skill set of yours. So if it's okay, would you mind taking a moment just to speak about the ventures that you've been involved in your career, some the Veloz Group, 30-Minute Mentors, and also your writing experience with Thrive Global?
Sure. So all really good topics to talk about, all really interesting topics of conversation. Happy to really dive into anything and everything that you think would be of interest to you and of interest to your listeners, and just happy to be here and happy to spend the time.
So what I'm most curious, maybe if you could just break down, firstly, your role at the Veloz Group and then how it's different from what you do at 30-Minute Mentors, and then also your experience at Thrive and how those things are different, and then maybe we'll get into how they actually all tie together.
Sure. So the Veloz Group is the company that I run. I started it with my brother. We build different businesses in different industries. We started 3 different companies that we continue to run. We have an office furniture business called Beverly Hills Chairs. We're the leading sellers of refurbished brand name chairs. So the Herman Miller Aeron chair, which is the #1 best-selling office chair ever made, retails for around $1,400. We sell that chair for anywhere from $500 to $600 a chair, and we're the leading sellers in the country of that chair refurbished. And we do the same thing for other high-end brand name chairs. So we have the Steelcase Leap chair, we have the Herman Miller Mira chair, and we sell to small to medium-sized businesses, but we also sell to a lot of individuals, particularly now in the new work from home environment when everyone's trying to figure out how to furnish their home office. So that's been an interesting shift for us as a business. We have a company called Custom Tobacco. So if you go to customtobacco.com, you can create your own fully customized private label cigars in real time. So everything's customized: the shape, the size, the blend, the wrapper, the filler, the flavor. The cigar band is customized. So everything is fully customized in real time, and it's popular among gift givers. So if you think about how hard it is to find the perfect gift for the man in your life, that could be your buddy, that could be your husband, your boyfriend, your boss, your dad, your uncle, your client. If you need the perfect gift for whoever that guy is, we've come up with a solution for it. And it's also popular for event planners, whether they're planning golf tournaments or whether they're planning weddings or corporate events. And we have a software development company called Veloz Solutions, where we work with early stage to middle market companies on different custom software development projects. Go
That
ahead.
was the part that was really interesting to me, actually, is the software development aspect. Reading about that, and this isn't, again, a kind of particular focal point, but going off on a slight tangent, It was interesting to me. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like one of the services that you offer within that company is the ability to build software solutions in companies that maybe they have an idea for software that might help an element of their company, but they just don't quite know how to build that software, and maybe that's not the primary thing that they do. Is that kind of fair? And maybe could you give me an example of a company that you've helped in that area?
Yeah, that's definitely a core component of what we do. And I think that's a good description. So we've worked with a lot of companies that either don't have in-house technology teams, or if they do have in-house developers, they need an augmentation to the team that they have. So they might have a small team, or they might have a team that is capable of building technology at a certain level, but needs to build something out of a little bit greater sophistication, and that's where we'll get engaged. So, an example, we've actually developed expertise over the last few years in the world of life insurance, kind of random, but we've picked up a couple of different clients in the life insurance space, and we've built out a number of different custom software solutions for these life insurance clients. So we've built out, for example, for one client, we've built out an LMS platform where he's able to offer other businesses the opportunity to go onto his platform and learn how to become more effective at selling insurance. So whatever the industry is, we've actually worked with a number of well-known nonprofits over the years, and so not confined to for-profit businesses. We're always interested in trying to help our clients become more successful, whether it's solving existing problems or exploring opportunities that through technology we're able to help them tackle.
The breadth of your current work is fascinating to me because, again, custom cigars for events is so different to surfacing leadership skills and interviewing techniques and journalism, which is then different to, as you talked about, kind of furniture. And is that kind of breadth of experience, that diversity, something that you've always wanted just in your particular career? Do you need lots of different projects on the go to kind of keep you motivated and entertained, or did it just work out that way?
No, it's worked out that way. So interestingly enough, my brother, who I started these businesses with, he needs something different to keep himself going. That's his personality.
Yeah.
I'm not like that. I don't get me wrong, I enjoy the diversity, I enjoy the breadth, I enjoy the ability to spend my time doing different things, but it isn't something that I felt like I needed from a very young age.
Yeah.
It definitely makes things interesting, but it wasn't necessarily a personality trait of mine that I was looking to actualize through entrepreneurship.
One thing that does stand out to me as you're saying that is what I guess tying this experience together is, I assume that it makes you particularly well networked in different industries, and that's something that comes across in your podcast. So you have leaders from a number of different industries, and I guess that also is somewhat reflective of the fact of the breadth of your experience, and also just again, if you look back on your writer profile on Thrive Global, just the number of people that you've interviewed across different sectors. So one of my questions, kind of moving into the topic of your podcast and your interviewing techniques, when you were launching your podcast, and do correct me if I'm wrong, but your podcast is 24 episodes in, I think launched 6 months ago and is released weekly at the moment. Is that still your aim?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just fascinated by the guests that you've managed to secure for those podcasts. They're amazing guests, and we're talking CEOs of the world's top companies, Olympians, I'm just fascinated by how you secured their time and have to be so, their time is so precious. Did that come from your background and the breadth of your background, or are there kind of certain techniques that you're using to secure big name guests and high profile guests? Where does that come from?
It's a question that I'm asked often, and the best advice I can give on the topic is I think it's really important to try to build something that people want to be a part of. And when I started the Veloz Group, we started the company out of my apartment. We started it with a bunch of different ideas and with our own personal savings from jobs we had. And we spent some time creating a logo and creating a website and tried to get some office space. And the day we opened up our doors to our office, we opened up our doors to literally the top college students from around the country, interns who were coming from every great university, were at the top of their class. And we've had this unbelievable history as an organization when it's come to hiring the absolute best, whether they're interns or employees or even contractors. We've just always been able to source top talent across our organization. And we've been able to do that even when we were a company that no one had ever heard of. I wasn't going on podcasts talking about the Veloz Group. Podcasts weren't even around back then. It was just an idea we had. It was a company name named after the street that we grew up on, Veloz Avenue in Tarzana, California. And the reason why I believe we've been able to attract such great talent over the years, even when no one had any idea who we were, and no one had any idea who we were because we were brand new, was because we were able to create something that people wanted to be a part of. And with 30-minute mentors, it's not all that different. I've really tried to focus on trying to create something that anyone and everyone would want to participate in some capacity, whether you're a top CEO or founder or celebrity or athlete or military leader, or whether you're someone on the other end of the spectrum. And I don't know that that's the fair way of putting it, but whether you're someone on the other end of the equation, interested in listening to the conversation and is interested in listening to the advice that these unbelievably successful people are going to give. And when I say other end of the spectrum, that isn't fair at all. That's not what I mean by any sense of the word. It's uh, not any. On the contrary, what I've actually found is that a number of my guests are actually regular listeners of the podcast. And something that has been really interesting to me is that my guests, who are the most successful people out there, are as interested as anyone in continuing to learn, continuing to grow, continuing to discover best practices, continuing to learn from the wisdom of others, continuing to try to cull as much valuable insight as they can from people who have gotten to the top. So, what I've tried to do is I've tried to create something that all kinds of people would be interested in participating in some capacity. And I am so appreciative of anyone who takes the time to listen to any one of my podcasts. Scott, you mentioned to me earlier that you've taken the time to listen to a number of my podcasts, and I'm so appreciative of that. And it's something that I'm so passionate about, and that I spend a lot of time in every single episode. Not only, you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, something you wanted to talk about was the interview process, not just showing up and winging it and asking questions, but really taking the time to prepare and to figure out how to be as thoughtful as possible to maximize this window that I have with these unbelievable guests, to give listeners the opportunity to get as much as they can in the time that they entrust with me and with 30-minute mentors. So I hope that answers your question. I know that it was a mouthful, but
you've touched on so many topics and many tangents that I could go off there. And there are a couple that I will explore there through that conversation with you. So the fascinating thing, just reflecting on what you just said, is creating an environment that people want to be in, want to contribute to, and want to be a part of because they continue to learn. And that's not easy to execute. And so, I mean, thinking it through from at least my perspective, initially speaking to you and hearing you and hearing some of your podcasts, is there's a certain element that's branding. I just think the branding's excellent. 30-minute mentors, who wouldn't want to be a part of that? It's that perfect bite size. It's not too much time for people that want to be a part of it. It's also something that's easy to listen to, leaders to listen to, a perfect tagline, that there's a certain, it's very clear what you're going to get out of the podcast. And I think so to some extent, it's just your background in some of those other businesses. You have a track record of delivering in, I guess, areas of, I see it from reading your interviews, almost like journalism and editorial, but also being an entrepreneur and business in that world. And when the two things combine, they can create this really interesting environment for conversation where you can span kind of topics which are informational and then more transactional when it comes to the business side of things, which is really interesting. And so I mean, if you were to, is there anything there that I haven't covered that you think you have done intentionally to create that environment to make 30-minute mentors very appealing? Is there something that I haven't touched on there?
I think you did a great job, Scott. I think it's just important to have a vision that you believe in and to stay true to it. Have a vision, have a set of values, and we live in a time and place where, and maybe this has always been the case, but I can tell you about the time and place right now. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone is going to tell you what to do. Everyone is going to tell you to do it this way or tell you to do it that way. And I think it's important to surround yourself with people who can give you good advice and to try to bring in as many perspectives as possible. But at the same time, you need to trust your gut. You need to trust your instincts. You need to go with what you know is right. And if you have a vision that you feel deep down is something that you believe can make a difference, that you believe can make an impact, go for it. Make it happen. Dive in, dive deep. It's not easy. No. It's a fair amount of work, but do it. Go for it.
And I guess on the topic of going for it and doing it, so you've been releasing an episode, like I said, 24 episodes, one every week since I think the beginning of this year, and like I said, interviewed a range of different guests. One thing I'm curious about, and you touched on research and putting in the time to undertake research, and I'm still finding my way with that journey. It's a tough thing for me to decide. I definitely want to do research to ensure that I ask interesting questions and things that I think are going to surface interesting, unique insight. But at the same time, I want a format and in conversation where I get to explore and go on tangents if I need to, which requires a little bit more time occasionally. I'm kind of finding that a difficult process of knowing how much research to do, and then at the same time being comfortable and relaxed enough to create an environment where you can go off on tangents. So I'm just curious, with your podcast, 30-Minute Mentors, is it that you book in 30 minutes? I know that some of them go slightly over 30 minutes, but do you spend an hour with these people and then edit down? How does that work for you, the recording process?
Yeah, it's a great question, a really interesting question. And the answer is, it totally depends on the guest. A perfect interview for me, I don't know if you remember or if any of your listeners remember the great Seinfeld commercial. It was a number of years ago, but Jerry Seinfeld is at the gas station and he's pumping his gasoline, and it's the perfect pump, and he's able to get it to the perfect dollar amount where it's
I do bring
the perfect pump. So occasionally you'll have that interview that's like the perfect. I don't think I've ever had a single interview that was exactly 30 minutes, but what I would say is the perfect interviews are interviews that are 30 to 35 minutes and don't require any editing other than me sending it to my audio editor to clean up whatever external noises there might be and to just make the audio sound better. But there are a fair number of interviews that are like that. I would actually say that the majority of the interviews are 30 to 35 minutes. We're able to kind of keep it in that length, in that range. I'm able to just sort of send it off to my editor, and there's listeners are able to get the raw conversation. Sometimes it isn't the case. So sometimes there are two scenarios where we'll run much longer. One scenario where we'll run much longer is when the conversation just goes a lot longer, and that's challenging. But I try really hard. Maybe it'll go to 37 minutes or to 38 minutes, and then I'll try to just shave off a couple of minutes. But the harder part is when a guest, and this is pretty rare, but it does happen from time to time, is when a guest will give like an 8-minute answer. And if a guest gives an 8-minute answer, I can't really give my listeners an 8-minute answer, because I know that if they hear an 8-minute answer, they're probably gonna stop listening to the rest of the episode.
Right.
Even if they do listen to the rest of the episode, it's not fair to them. So if a guest is not necessarily jiving with the format of the show, and as I'm doing the interview, I have a feeling that I'm going to need to go back and do some editing, I will then run the interview a little bit longer, being mindful of the fact that I will need to go back and do some editing.
That's interesting.
I would say that that's definitely, I've done a lot of interviews now. 24 have aired, but I've done quite a few more that have been recorded. And it's a very, very small percentage that have been like that, but enough that I've learned that technique, and I've understood that that's a technique to utilize when I do an interview and with a guest who does kind of go on and on and on, because I don't feel like it's fair for a listener to give them content that they're not going to enjoy.
How much research are you doing for each guest per episode, or does that range as well?
I put in as much research as I need to until I feel like I have a set of questions that will give listeners as valuable a 30 minutes as possible. So it's not an insignificant amount. So even guests who I'm friends with, I've had guests on the podcast who are personal friends, and I still spend quite a bit of time preparing for those, because I want to make sure that I am optimizing the time together. So even if it's a personal friend and I'm not necessarily researching who they are because I know them, I'm spending a lot of time preparing how to figure out how to best structure this time together.
That's something that's really interesting to me, because I've been spending a lot more time on research than actually the recording of the episodes, which I think a lot of people that listen to podcasts, you hear the output, and with podcasting, you don't always see the behind the scenes work. Whereas with, I guess, some other entertainment industries, and particularly with things like vlogging and live streaming, you see the work in progress. But podcasting is so accessible and on demand that you don't see the behind the work. The behind the scenes work that goes into it. And there's a lot of, I guess, research before a podcast is recorded.
I don't know that anyone really wants to watch me sitting on my laptop on with a Google Doc and cruising the internet. I don't know how entertaining that would be for anyone. I think you're better off watching Ozark.
Don't get me into Ozark. That could be a whole other episode. I've just finished watching recently the last episode of the last season. I just thought that was phenomenal. So
That was
that's
great.
amazing.
Yeah. No,
Oh, it was really good. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. I know, just talking about time and being pressured with the time. I know I don't have too much time with you today, so I just got a couple of questions to close on. So, are there any episodes so far in recording your own podcast that have stood out to you? If you're going to recommend to kind of the listeners of this podcast to go and listen to yours, and there's something that really resonates with you, maybe someone that you've interviewed that you'd love to interview again and you could just spend all day with?
yeah, I get asked that question quite a bit, and I get asked it in different variations.
Mm.
And I always give the same answer, which might be a little bit disappointing, but I've interviewed so many unbelievably fascinating people that it's hard to really pick one person who is my quote unquote favorite interview or best interview. But the best advice that I can give, and it's advice that I give all the time to people who I come across who are new to the podcast, whether they're personal friends or whether they're people I don't know personally, but I'm connecting with and guiding them on how to get started with the show, is start with the episode that features the guest that you personally are most interested in. So, Scott, you mentioned earlier on in this conversation that I have had quite a diverse set of guests. So, I've had professional athletes, I've had celebrities, I've had CEOs, I've had founders, I've had military leaders, I've had influencers, I've had a pretty broad mix of people, and even within those categories, there's definitely a range. So even within the CEO category, I've had the CEO of a household name consulting firm. I've had the CEO of Campbell Soup. I've had the CEO of Gold's Gym, founder of Kayak, founder of Electronic Arts, founder of Square. Even among military leaders, I've had, um, you know, admiral, general. This upcoming podcast is going to be with an Air Force general. So find the guest who you think is going to be most interesting to you. Start from there, and hopefully it resonates and you subscribe and get into the series and become a listener.
That's great. That's great advice as well. And just one final question in closing, because you're learning so many lessons from these great leaders, and as fascinating as that is, I think I'd almost find it, and do find it sometimes, overwhelming. The information that you receive can vary so much from leader to leader that it's hard to know what to apply. So I'm assuming that your part of undertaking the podcast is also to learn yourself. Are there any single lessons that stand out from your time so far in your podcast that you've applied to your life that have made a real difference?
So many, and we could truly spend an entire episode on this. I give speeches to companies, I give speeches to nonprofits, I give speeches to universities, and this is a topic that I talk about, lessons learned from America's top leaders. And actually, one of the things that's interesting and perhaps counterintuitive is that the themes from America's top leaders are fairly universal. So when you interview a leading CEO or you interview a military leader, you interview a leader in sports or entertainment, a lot of the themes that you hear are actually pretty consistent. So that's something that I think is important for people to understand. Put another way, the core principles of great leadership are universal. To be a great leader, you need to be someone who cares about others. You need to be someone who's capable of inspiring and motivating others, not through fear, not through intimidation, but through connectivity, by getting other people to want to do things, not by having people do things because they're afraid. And we can go on and on about this topic, but needless to say, the core principles of great leadership are universal. And I think if you listen to a string of podcasts, you will hear a series of themes that will coalesce for you. And that's certainly how it's been for me.
I know you have been generous with your time, and I thank you so much for appearing on the podcast. Just before I leave, do you just want to know anywhere where people can find you on social media, your website and so forth? And I'll link to all of this in the show notes.
Scott, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Has been great being with you, great being with your listeners. It's been a ton of fun for me. I try to make it really easy for anyone interested. It's just my name, Adam Mendler. So you can find me at adammendler.com. You can find me on social media at Adam Mendler, at Adam Mendler on Instagram, at Adam Mendler on Twitter. My podcast, 30 Minute Mentors, is available on 30minutementors.com. It's also available on your favorite podcasting app. So whatever app you're listening to this great podcast on, pop onto it and spell out 30 Minute Mentors. Listen, subscribe, enjoy. And Scott, thanks again for having me. This has been an absolute pleasure.
And I'm sitting here recording in a Seinfeld t-shirt. So for me, that is the perfect pump. And that's the end of this episode. Thank you so much for your time, and go check out all of Adam's resources, which I'll link in the show notes. This has been the Advertising Hour. Thank you.